Welcome to Clear Conversations, Entrepreneurial Legacies with your host, John Sleeting, an executive partner for Clearwater Capital Partners. Join John and his guests on this exclusive journey behind the scenes of extraordinary entrepreneurial families. In this series, we will dive deep into the stories of John's guests, who generously unveil the paths they've walked, the challenges they've overcome, and the wisdom they've gained along the way. Throughout these conversations, we explore their achievements beyond mere recognition, disclosing the distinctive perspectives that have shaped their entrepreneurial journeys. We hope you enjoy.
Hello, and welcome to Clear Conversations, the Entrepreneurial Legacy Series. I'm John Sleeting, your host, and today I'm joined by Garrett Sweigert. Garrett is the founder, president, and chief executive of BLK OUT Logistics and Transportation. He'll dive more into the companies and what that means and what they're about. But I will say, as I've gotten to know Garrett over time, you're going to want to buckle your seatbelts for this conversation. It's a ride. I love Garrett's frankness, his personality, his transparency, his authenticity. I could go on and on with adjectives about who he is, and you're going to get a glimpse inside of both his heart and his head when it comes to this concept of making impact, leaving a legacy, and doing it through business and engaging his wife, Lindsay, and their family in the journey that they're on. So hold on, and we will dive in. Garrett, I am so excited from the time I met you for us to have this conversation.
Who knew, man? At dinner, right?
Right. And just happenstance, sitting next to each other in a group of 130 individuals having a steak and a wine and a bourbon, yep, and just getting into a conversation. And now here, not even a year later, of our relationship and just how it's built over time, and being able to sit down and talk about legacy and talk about business and talk about wealth and talk about all these things that you have going on in your life and your story. And I think there's a lot of people that are going to benefit and enjoy hearing more and learning more about Garrett, the Sweigerts. We'll talk a little bit about Lindsay, your background, and where you're going, right? Because like I said in our preparation, I'm still consider myself a young man, and so that makes you a very young man too. And
just getting started,
and working through things, but tons of experience and miles underneath your feet as well. So when we start out here, legacy, right? When you hear that word legacy, what does that mean to you?
It's heavy, man. I mean, legacy for me is, it really is a currency. Like, you hear people say, like, legacy is the new currency. And I always remember something that Gary Vee had popped up, and this was like years ago, but he was just talking about, like, how many people are going to show up at your funeral, and that being a true tracer of, like, the type of human you are. Like, forget the revenue you make, forget the businesses you create or the people that you claim to impact, but, like, how many people really care about your soul, right? Mm-hmm. Like, about, like, who you are as a person and the impact you've had on them. And that's legacy to me, is impact, and it's impact on my children, it's impact on our community, it's impact on employees. It goes at different levels, and there's different depth of impact. Yeah. But for me, that legacy is it. That is everything, like the last name that we're given, all these different things to carry that forward and help impact people. I mean, that's the charge. Yeah. Like, I feel like that's the charge I'm given.
Well, and given different people have different perspectives, right? Unfortunately, there's some people, when we speak to legacy or they hear that for the first time, they default to, well, my legacy becomes my estate planning documents, right? Yeah. My final tax returns. Everything you just described has nothing to do with that. Those items are important, but you're talking about impact. So when you think about the impact that you individually, and Lindsay, your wife and your family, and how you're building that, when you're talking about that, how do you now envision what that impact is? How do you say that here's the destination, which is a word you've used before too?
Yeah. I think initially I thought of impact as having a destination, but I never really considered the ongoing pieces of impact, like how impact helps people progress, and how I'm charged to be a catalyst for them, or whatever that may be. Like, and that happens with showing up for my kids. That happens with, pouring into them and teaching them, or how am I leading with masculinity with my family, and how am I leading spiritually? How am I leading my employees? Like, how am I encouraging people to get the most out of themselves as I'm on that journey with them? Yeah. And I think when there's always been this separation with legacy where it's like, I've always kind of viewed it as one thing. Like it's something that exists and it's live. It is alive. And I think so many people consider it this thing where it's like, oh, my legacy is at a pull point when I die, or an exit event or something like that. And to me, I could have an impact on an employee of ours this morning that changes his family tree. We encourage him to have children. We encourage him to start his own business. We encourage him to do, any number of things. And so to me, legacy becomes a touch point game. Like how many times and how much you're going to encourage people to open up and lead through that, like by being vulnerable, like showing that.
Yeah.
That's a big piece.
Yeah. You mentioned the funeral side of it and how many people show up, and then what are people saying? What do you want people to say about Garrett?
Well, that's pretty heavy, man.
40, a half century from now, 50 years from now, right? A long time.
I think it's really about betterment and improvement, and I think that, I want those people to look at me as just an example, not the example, not the epitome of something. At the end of the day, I'm just a man, right? Like I'm not, I'm no different than you. We're flesh. And for me, I think just being a tracer of someone who grew up in somewhat unique circumstances and someone saying, hey, you can do whatever you're charged to do. And if you put the effort in and you're open to the guidance and the tutelage and you've got good work ethic and all that, then game on, and I think it's a big piece of it. I think a lot of that isn't like, I don't need big eulogies and fancy stuff and nice urns and things like that. For me, it's way more about, man, that guy just charged me to be the best version of myself. Plain and simple.
Well, and we'll come back to the upbringing in a second. So just share with the listeners a little bit more. You've got multiple businesses. Share a little bit about what the businesses are, right now. Maybe a little bit about your family too. Kind of set people up for where things are today, and then we'll rewind.
Yeah, you got it. So we've got three children, 7-year-old and twin 6-year-olds. And actually, I didn't tell you this. We got one on the way as well.
Oh, so, congratulations!
Yeah, right? You heard it first.
You
heard it first. So we're super excited about that.
That's
another baby boy on the way. So such a blessing there. BLK OUT Logistics is the main entity. It started as a trucking company and, just grew it pretty much from the ground up. But we've got 2 locations local to the Chicagoland area here. We focus on expedited logistics. We do everything from first and final mile to over the road hotshot, white glove, time sensitive transfers, air import, a lot of specialty, high value logistical moves.
Okay.
And we take it all the way from the middle mile to the final mile. And a lot of it's just geared on communication, integrity, customer impact. But I found myself in this wedge that was just really high touch. It was started with medical equipment and, high valuation items that needed an extra care, like extra layer of customer service.
Okay.
And, somehow I ended up in that as a driver, and I saw an opportunity and just kind of went for it.
You started out yourself driving, with a single truck.
Yeah. So I was I was saving up to get married, and my wife's Italian, so we're inviting half of Chicago to the wedding, and I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to afford this. And I was working a pretty consistent job. It was 6 to 2:30 Monday through Friday, and I had never really done the corporate America thing. A lot of my journey wasn't just like a corporate environment like that. And a friend of mine that I'd worked with, who had worked logistics at the previous company, said, hey man, I don't have any money to give you a wedding gift, but I can give you an opportunity to make some money to maybe save up for your wedding. And I'm like, yeah, cool, man, I'm in. And I'd come from working a tremendous amount of hours. It wasn't like I was always just like, the job's done when it's done. I didn't have like a punch point or clock out point. So I just would do 6 to 2:30 Monday through Friday, and then I'd clock in and go drive a truck and do it from 3:30 to 2 a.m. or whatever he needed, and just run it, the rest of the time, save up money. So it was pretty humble roots, but it started, and that was for somebody else. Like I was driving someone else's truck, and just that was my first exposure into like air import freight and air freight in general.
Well, let's even go further back.
Yeah.
You grew up in the Pacific Northwest.
Yep.
So start filling in some of the blanks.
Yeah. So grew up in Beaverton, Oregon. So just outside Portland. One sister, mom was an attorney. Dad was a machine tool salesman. And, that you talk about where like entrepreneurial journeys start. I mean, I didn't know this until my wife slapped it in my face, but in a loving way. But, I was like bred for that type of journey right out of the gate, and I grew up, my mom had her own law practice, and, I'm doing discovery files with her, and I'm, like going through all these things, and whatever she needed in her business, I was like her little worker. And so and there's probably some child labor laws against it, but and then I would go and get the experience with my dad at his business. And, he's selling chip throwing machines, like CNC machines, when that stuff was first starting to come out. And, I'm sweeping shop floors and inside of equipment and watching manufacturing happen, and really kind of like the backbone of American industry go. And I just kept undulating between these two things. And I'm like, I'd go with my mom to all her events and my dad to all his events, and them together. And you end up forging this like white collar, blue collar skill set. It was crazy. Like, and it just happened from, I would say 6 years old is when I really started to like get into that and be interested by it.
And even realize, being aware of
no clue what was happening, just being, completely extorted in a good way. I mean, it really was. And a lot of that forged the work ethic that I had, continued with, was just, I saw my parents working a lot, and at times in unhealthy amount. Like, I'm seeing them work every single weekend. I'm seeing them work at nights. I'm seeing that work be prioritized over family, which has caused a huge ripple effect in my life, and it was really wild to experience that at such a young age and not have it explained to me at all. So that was a really interesting piece. Like, to have a white collar and blue collar. I mean, we're at a spot where I'm 8, 9, 10 years old, suit and tie, yucking it up with doctors and, finance folks and just whatever. And then like put the Carhartts on and go on the shop floor and get metal sprayed at you, and it started to just be really fun to play those two roles, and I'm like, man, this is really wild. Like,
and on that piece of it, right? What do you think you wish the rest of the world understood about the other side of that equation, right? So if you're talking about the white collar, your mom, the attorney, having that approach, what do you wish they understood about your experience with your dad and the blue collars, and vice versa? What do you wish those individuals understood about individuals that have quote unquote white collar roles?
That they're both beautiful. That they're literally, both sides of those are beautiful. They each have evil within them. They each have beautiful pieces within them. And it really becomes what you make of that experience or whatever that offering is. Like, I saw amazing, charismatic, awesome people on the white collar side, and I saw amazing, charismatic salespeople on the blue collar side, and I saw people on manufacturing floors that were the most pure spirited people that you'll ever meet. They're honest, they're hardworking, and they're very self-aware, content. There's no denouncing that, I mean, and what they chose to do, like the level of fulfillment, that was probably the most unique piece, is like you saw both sides of it. You saw people that were completely self-aware and knew exactly what they wanted to do. And then you saw people hiding behind money, and doing that in a way that it is toxic on both sides. Right. So I think that the important thing for me was to be able to see that both of those realities exist in both of those wedges, and one's not greater than the other. Right. They both have a tremendous amount of value.
Right. And we talk about the greater than, right? That all of a sudden puts in like a math equation. And unfortunately, the greater than, less than comes to a math equation, and people ascribe value, whether it be the value of their net worth, right? The value of a title, the value of a position, the value of a role in society, versus the dignity of each individual actually living out in purpose, whatever that might be for them.
Yeah.
That there is not better or greater than or less than, as individuals are living in purpose.
For
right?
sure.
So I love how you describe that. And there's good and bad on all sides of that. But we've got to come back to, there's the humanity component that comes into just who people are and who people are created to be, and what they're doing to live that out, and not hiding behind a balance sheet or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And so as you roll that forward then in your experience and just understanding and your learning on a day-to-day basis, I mean, did you start out and saying, okay, yep, I'm gonna be an entrepreneur, right? You end up, or that evolving. You already hit a little bit on the truck side of it, but there's also a few years in there too.
I feel like the people that it's got to be a new like, and I'm, relatively young guy, but like, it's got to be a newer generation thing. The people that like stamp themselves like, I am an entrepreneur. I haven't met any entrepreneurs that were just so forthright with that statement. It's just like, or no, that's what I want to be. Yeah. It just, you end up finding that I end up finding that I'm really passionate about solving a wide array of issues. And I would take those to uncomfortable depths to solve. And I noticed that a lot of people would tap out, and it would happen like super young, like it was all that experience was coupled with like, the normal sports experience that you'd have going through high school. I went to Oregon Episcopal School out there. So it was a small, it was a small faith-based like private school with a really extreme curriculum, like great. And I did that pre-kindergarten through high school. Absolutely incredible experience. But I never saw that even throughout that. I wasn't like, oh yeah, entrepreneurship calls to me. It was, I just saw my parents continuing to get up. I just saw them getting punched in the face and just having the willingness and the courage to get up. And I didn't know that at the time. Yeah. And then so I just started kind of like, okay, well, I'm their spawn. I should probably just do that. Right. Like you get hit, you get knocked down, you just get up, and we got to go in on Saturday. We got to go in on Saturday. That's just what needs to happen. And it starts building that. It just starts building that within you. It's like something that's just, it's like a pile, right? This continues to kind of stack up.
Well, and so the K through 12 was rigorous academic, education growing up. But if I understand correctly, you did not pursue a formal education then, from what people would think about a 4-year institution, bachelor's degree, business, I mean, those sort of things. Your path and the different areas you find yourself involved with is a little bit more circuitous. Is that fair? Is that?
Yeah, no, for sure. And we were at the school to pursue college, plain and simple. I mean, it was, I don't think there's probably better establishments in the country, but this was the type of school that your application gets put in a different stack and considered differently. And I can't remember the exact split, but out of 48 kids in a graduating class, I was the only one not to attend college. I think 70% of our class went Ivy League, and it didn't call to me. That school was so great at teaching us how to critically think. And they were very forthright about it. They said, like, going into high school, the whole purpose of this high school is to teach you to challenge your sources and critically think. And they did it through all the normal avenues, right? But they would vary the curriculum based on your capacity. And I mean, to the point where I've got some crazy stories about this school and how much of it like wasn't a fit for me, but it was really allowed my personality to just be itself. Like I would go into a situation where in a final exam or something like that, and everyone's like, oh, we write this paper, right? And you got a bunch of kids, and obviously it's a very smart group of people, and I'm kind of like the hillbilly in the situation, I feel like, and just kind of, the get stuff done kind of guy. And everyone writes this paper and the sources are cited. And, I like walk in and I'm like, hey, I don't agree with this. Like, I don't agree with how you presented this, like, to the teacher. I don't agree with how the final exam's judged. This is not a tracer of knowledge. You're asking me to regurgitate some information, and I think it's wrong. And the teacher would just look at me like, what? I remember doing this in a religion class we had, and the guy was so awesome. And he's like, all right, well, we'll debate on it right now. And I was like, cool, let's do it. And I ended up getting a B in the class. It was great. I mean, but it was like things like that I just, it gave me an avenue to let Garrett be Garrett, and that was super, super unique. But I did apply. I was accepted to Purdue, and I was going to go for mechanical engineering. It was a heavy math science school. And toward the end of school, it just didn't feel right. Like I was so tapped out, sitting behind a desk and listening to people talk to me. I wanted to do. I've always been a hands-on guy. I was a car guy, and I was so curious with how things not just theoretically were made, but were actually made. So when I graduated high school, I was like, you know what, I'm going to defer a year. I want to go to trade school. I just want to do some hands-on stuff. I want to go weld. I want to just I was always into automotive. And originally I wanted to go be a Formula One engineer. Okay. And this was before all this Formula One craze or whatever, but it was pretty raw. And you had to be a mechanical engineer. It was like the prerequisite. And I'm like, well, it's worth it. If I got to sit through 4 years of math and science to go work in Formula One, then
that's what I want to do.
Yeah, exactly. So I did that. I deferred a year, and I ended up working in the motorcycle industry. And I got linked up with a guy who was a Pirelli distributor, tire distributor, and he had a distributorship in the Northwest. And I started doing that on the weekends. And I'm like, man, I'm in race. Like, I got in racing with no qualifications, just tenacity, and just asking questions. And so in that deferral year, I just worked nonstop and started rolling. And I'm like, you know what? Forget college. It's just not like, I don't need college. I'm in college right now. Like, I'm doing the things that after 4 years, I was going to try to hope to get into. Right. And I started learning more about tire technology, and it brought me into the engineering side within that, you know, with no formalized education. I was just like, you just learn, you become a sponge within it.
But that's the difference between, you know, college being a destination or a collection of buildings, right? But then the learning, the knowledge gained, the understanding doesn't have to be in a building. And this is where I think the entire education system has to continue to evolve from what it's been, not just from student debt crisis and a bunch of people taking on debt that they probably shouldn't have for loans that they can't afford to pay off, right? The investment and return wasn't necessarily a good decision at that point in time, but just focused on learning, right? Because frankly, we're learning something new every day. We should be. The learning part shouldn't stop. And that's the focus, right? That's the education, and you are hands-on learning. Working for the dealership and in motorcycle racing. And I think too, you took up a little bit of the actual racing and driving yourself too.
Yeah, absolutely. So that actually took me to California. So after the deferral year, I went to California, packed all my stuff in a Penske truck and rolled out, and found myself a job. No real assistance. I think my mom drove down with me, but was pretty much like, good luck, kid. And but I was raised to be self-sufficient like that. Like, she was making me pay rent in my deferral year. It was not like a traditional, she's just going to fund your lifestyle type thing. I worked nonstop in that year, and saved up cash and just put all my stuff together, and found a job down in Sacramento. And then I went to a trade school, and she made me, she's an attorney, right? So she types up this like formal contract about, hey, if you're late one day on rent, it doubles and there's interest. And I'm like, 17, 18. It was ridiculous. Yeah. In hindsight, it was great because it was like my first contractual exposure. But yeah, so, I ended up going down there. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to go to this hands-on school. I want to get into high-performance fabrication, welding roll cages, high-performance engine building. So I'd found a tech school down there to do that. And it was a condensed program. I could go to school at night. I could work during the day. And then I would do Pirelli, like fly out on the weekends. Okay. And do all that. So that's what I did. I worked, from 7 to 4, and then went to school from like 5 p.m. to 2 a.m. And then which kind of set the stage for blackout. Like, thinking back on it, it's kind of crazy. Like, that type of cycle is familiar, and again,
it
was
18, just, 19, 20 years old, all during this time. So to pause for a moment, for the other individuals out there that might be listening right now in that age category, they're also looking at it going, the formal college education route isn't for me. What encouragement or perspective would you share with those individuals? And what perspective or thoughts would you share with the parents of those individuals that are trying to coach and encourage them?
I would say debt without purpose sucks. Like, college, if you're going to go into a professional, you want to be an architect, you want to be an engineer, you want to be an attorney, it's pretty clear what you need to do to get the certification to do that. You're not going to hustle your way into the bar typically. But I think there's been this like idealistic view that college was going to net us, and it was generationally, right? I was always told college is going to net you a 6-figure salary and a house here and all these other things, and it was a known. And I think, we were probably one of the first generations kind of coming through that just didn't exist. Like, the prerequisites started to get dropped around companies hiring for college, or, hey, this was going to automatically qualify you to be a manager. But, I would say that college isn't for everyone. Yeah. and that's okay.
And shouldn't be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we've found ourselves down this road where we need to like overly formalize all these things. And it's so rare that I meet people every day that have higher education than me that I employ. and I don't mean that in like a glorification way. It's just a reality, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And I also respect that journey too. Like, I absolutely admire people that have gone to, I mean, John, I don't know how many certificates you have. I know it's a lot, but like, I love that, man. And I love learning from you. And it's not, for a long time, I think I used it as a comparison tool. And just because that's all I really knew. It was like, whether it was finance, but we have pretty rudimentary comparison tools just as people.
Right.
So whether it was like, how much money do you make or what school did you go to at that time period? I'm like, well, I'm not in school and everyone else is.
Right.
That ended up being my comparison tool.
Right. Well, into the parents of those young people, right? Because there's some families, they're like, my child was the first hope for the first one to go to college in our family, or, they were on the path, they were supposed to go to college and they're not. Like, what advice would you have given your parents when you said, yep, I'm not doing that? How'd that conversation play itself out?
Yeah. Challenge your kid to grow, plain and simple. Challenge your kid to grow. And if my parents had exerted more intentionality around training me to be an entrepreneur or exposing me to their small businesses or helping me understand P&Ls and balance sheets, or helping me understand employment, like just straight employment, other than me just doing it, I just got it by osmosis, and I would just encourage people to not consider that there's one route to a destination.
Yeah.
And that there's many routes to the destination, and each one is beautiful. If they're done and walked in integrity, they're beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think that don't get hyper fixated on there being one path, because your kid is not living your path. Like, I was so far off my mom's path. It was ridiculous. My mom knew at like 12 years old, she's like, I need to be an attorney, and pushed the attorney button like the whole way. It was like vocal about this, like push the attorney button the entire way through and just became an attorney. And I was like, you're insane. Like, that's just not, that wasn't me,
Right.
It just wasn't me. And so for her to impose her will on me, you end up getting like the sports parent thing where people are living vicariously through the kids, and it just gets messy, right?
Yeah.
Kids are doing it for the wrong reasons. Grades slip, or their commitment's not there. And it's like, we should be lighting kids' fires.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the thing. Like, stoke the flame. What are they passionate about?
Right.
Get them passionate about something. Like, let them rip on something. Let them go hustle. Let them,
right.
Get a little meat between the teeth and like, you see what this is. Like, that's the thing that igniting people is really what it is. And that education is supposed to prepare you with a general knowledge base to go do X and start to get experience. If they're ready for experience and you trust their decision-making, why wait?
So we'll come back now. How does it move from a family to leading people, right? And the employees, and working with customers and working with suppliers and all of that in the business. You already shared a little bit of your start and working a couple jobs in the truck and being there at the very beginning. Take us through a little bit of the journey for the last, it's going on 10 years. You got the decade celebration coming up here. So these last 10 years now, highs and lows. What have you learned now in these last 10 years of leading Blackout? Yeah,
I think like I underestimated, or I didn't really consider the importance of infrastructure in the company, as it, and I really didn't know all that I was capable of, just been like kind of blessed with this like tenacity to just press and like just to be pushy and to just not stop at no, or not stop at like a maybe, and I wouldn't stop. I would just keep going and going. If someone tells me no, I would just keep showing up and just be relentless. And not in like a malicious way, but just, there was just a lot of intention, and I just felt the weight of that and would deploy it. But I didn't really consider what sales versus infrastructure, like you're constantly juggling these two things as you're building anything. You're constantly juggling, okay, we're bringing revenue in the door, and then how are we fulfilling on that promise? How are we making that commitment a reality? And ours is crazy in time-sensitive logistics. The fulfillment aspect of it is 85% of the business. Like it's that becomes your sell. So there's like a couple layers of the sell. But I started realizing that like excellence around execution was really what I'm positioning and selling. So as much as I love opening doors and shaking hands, and I'm a sales focused person, I also got to experience doing, and I grew the business through doing. I didn't grow it. This wasn't like, oh, this is my 5th business and we've got $10 million in the bank. Like, this started with $1,200 and like a prayer. And so and like a lot of this is going to work out with Lindsay. And so I think with that, there's you kind of go to a different depth, or I did internally, like what you have to reach internally to light that fire. You start feeling the gravity of that, and almost to like a fight or flight point where you're just, no, this has to happen. And you just end up convincing yourself, no, this has to happen. Payroll has to happen. Like, this account has to happen. It was not negotiable throughout that process, especially at the beginning, right? Like,
right. Well, in the beginning though, when it's you and, you in a truck, but when you start bringing people into it, right? So how many people now total as part of the organization?
We're 58.
Okay.
Yeah, we had it up to 90. And I ended up trimming it back because we got away from our purpose. So it was a really challenging decision, but we weren't exuding excellence at the level. I wasn't having the impact on people that I wanted to have. Our head count got like super high.
All right, so it sounds like there's an episode probably on that topic into itself.
For sure.
But when you say you got off of purpose, what did you learn from that? How did it stray? How did you even know that you were getting off purpose for what you were designed for? Take us through a little bit.
I felt a disconnection with the company. So like I really felt like I almost hated what I created, and I didn't feel poised and passionate about executing it. And I didn't feel like I wanted to pour into people. Like, I wanted to hide from it. And I wasn't proud of what it was producing, whether it would be like financially or whatever. It was just, I got obsessed with more. And I really put my ego in front of the growth. So like, when you put your ego is such an interesting thing, you put that at the front. That can be an amazing thing that gives you power to charge and take risks that like normally people would not want to take. But it can also be terrible and detrimental and a boat anchor, right? If it becomes about me and I'm rah-rahing out front and look at how big we are and look at how much we have and look at more, I ended up getting obsessed with just growing via more. And which I think is, when we're talking about purpose and legacy, like those things, it's the direction after the production that really is the anchor for that stuff. Like, to me, producing isn't a big, I don't mean it egotistically. It's not a big deal. I expect that from myself. Like, I expect to land those deals. I expect to close clients and build whatever 9-figure company. I expect it. I genuinely expect it. And I found myself not being proud of what I had built. And I realized that the purpose of why I was building this or what I was doing was just misguided. Like, it was less about the people and more about being some type of industry leader. I'm the best, or I'm this, and, a bunch of rah stuff. And that's just not, at the end of the day, I'm like, I don't really care about that. I don't care about being the best logistics provider. I care about the impact that we're having. That will come. Like, that comes. Right. If you're excellent and amazing to people, and you have high expectations around excellence internally, you tell the truth, you do a lot of great things, like you care. Yeah. That stuff shows up. You will be an industry leader by default. Yeah. And so I just realized that I was putting how we were perceived ahead of what people's experience was internally within the company. And I was wrong. Which
is ultimately all that matters, right? Yeah. And because people are going to make up in their mind what they think they're perceiving or not, versus the people that are feeling the impact. Again, the customers, suppliers, and the employee team itself. Yeah. But yet painful. I mean, the shrinking doesn't take away from the humanity of those individuals then that, we're now finding themselves, out of a role, right?
Oh, dude, you want to talk about weight, man. No one talks about that. No one talks about, you hear all these highlight reels and stuff like that online. When you have to make those decisions and you made those commitments to people, it's what was probably one of the most humbling, embarrassing things that I had to endure within business because of the rate at which we had grown. I mean, for us to get to close to 100 head count of employees in a relatively short period of time, it was really, really tough to look those people square in the eye and say, I screwed this up. Like, I did this wrong, and it was an important but challenging and difficult exercise. And it sucked, man. There's no two ways about it. Like, it sucked. And as a leader, you get to wear all that. That's what people, people think. You hear a lot of that stuff. It's kind of, it's glorified now. A lot of people glorify the pain of it, but I don't think a lot of people really talk about what that looks like at 2 a.m. when you wake up and you're thinking about the person you just let go. Or like, I wake up in the morning to go work out and I can't even find my shorts because I'm concerned about Tammy and what did I just do to her? And that there's just a gravity that comes with that I've always felt, and it took that to help me realize how much I really cared for people, and that was such an eye-opener. I felt so fortunate to have been shown that, because without that, you've just been on this endless spiral of more with no purpose on the backside.
Yeah.
And it just becomes super hollow.
So is there something in there though that became more clarifying in terms of what the purpose is, what the purpose is about, that forced you back into making really hard decisions, right? I mean, it sounded like it was a pivotal moment that evolved a little bit, right? In terms of, it doesn't just snap fingers and say, okay, here's what we're doing next, right? But it really was very personal. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't necessarily, and when I say not strategic, it wasn't like the marketplace was driving some innovation and change that you needed to anticipate and react to. It was really internal revelation to say, this is what we're building is actually wrong. It's not aligned with who you are, your value system, your purpose component. That something really triggered in there. And that was, a few years back now at this point.
Yeah. And I had a moment. This was so crazy, man. I remember walking through our warehouse and I'm walking by all these drivers who are loading their trucks out, and I didn't even know them. I didn't even know their names. I didn't know their families. Like, our hiring cycle, I just gotten in such a frenzy for more that I was just like, I'm like, who is this person? Is this, they're wearing my shirt. They're wearing our logo, and I have no idea who this person is as a human. Like, how messed up is that? And we're not that big of an organization for that to be a reality. I don't have 15,000 employees in 20 different states, and, we're on hiring, we're whatever, like getting people in the door, and the turnover rate and burn rate super high and all this stuff. It just, we're not like that. We're the care company. And I remember walking through it and feeling like such a fraud having that. And it was crazy, man. Like, it was like a pit in your stomach, because I had built at the origin, it's like you had to care about the people. I didn't have any of the other stuff. There's no benefits. There's I'm giving guys trucks with no AC, no heat. Like, here's an extra moving blanket to use. Like, I love you. What else can I do? You need me to help you move on the weekends? Like, whatever I could do to extend myself, to just share my gratitude with people, just for being willing to take a risk being an employee for me at the origin. I felt so far away from that it was like, it was crazy. It was so far away from where I felt like I had started that I'm like, man, this is terrible.
Yeah.
This is terrible. And part of that, and that started to forge this disconnection, which started to just take us in a bad spot from a revenue standpoint, how we're making money, like all that stuff. It poisoned it. Okay. It just felt like poison. So,
and how has that shaped you? I mean, I think you just said it, right? In terms of the way you try to engage your team today than you did back at that point in time, or what it evolved to at that point in time. Yeah. If you think about some of your, team could be listening, to this episode, right? What have you learned, and what do you want the team to know about how you want to approach your future in the next decade when it comes to leading the individuals?
Yeah. I mean, it beat the hell out of me, man. Like, it's serious. Like, it took a physical toll. Like, I was gaining weight. I was like just bad physically, man. I mean, I was on, there was a point where I was on blood pressure medication when I was like in my 20s, like just stressed out and just, not in a good spot. And it comes down to care. And I was reckless with advancement. And admittedly, like I wanted nothing more than to just crush everything, everyone, every sales record, how many stops we were doing a day. I'm competing against businesses that have been around for 35 years, that have all their assets paid for. I've got all this stuff stacked against me, and it's just like, I want to charge the hill. I don't care if I've got a spear and they've got planes, like, doesn't matter. Like, I can do it. And you get so obsessed with this blind idea of creation. Like, I got so obsessed with creating that it was just like, I lost track of the infantry. You know what I mean? And you're just out front and you tunnel focused here, and there's no check-in. And it was like, I don't even know who I'm fighting with. And like, it wasn't about, I don't need an army of 20,000. Like, I want the 300 that are bad people in a good way.
In a good way.
Yeah. Fighters, right? Like, I want frontline people. I want people that have high capacity, that are high octane, that want to go get it, and they want to push themselves to progress. They want to push themselves to grow. And that wasn't what I was producing from a people standpoint. I was producing people that just were occupying and then dipping out after a while.
And so on your website, put just the values. You have 8 values listed. And time-wise, we're not going to be able to go through
don't quiz me
I'm sure
on
there's a story. I'm sure behind each of these is going through. I'll read them, and we can maybe dive a little bit deeper into a few of these, because then I also want to shift over to values in the family and how you and Lindsay are approaching things there, and how this asset that is the businesses that are growing and how you're thinking about that. But first, the values you have listed for your team. Caring hard, right? I think that resembles a little bit of what the way you're describing. Caring hard, solving problems. Talked a little bit about education, right, and problem solving. Being accountable, and even you being accountable to the people that you're leading and serving. Sharing pain, getting better, details matter, staying humble, and choosing fun. Right. And I just listening right in this conversation even to date, and now reading back through these, I mean, I've heard all of these coming from you, right? Because they have to come from you in terms of what you desire to achieve in the mission that's there. If you look at these, were these in existence on day one? I think they were built into you, right? But maybe the words took shape over time. When you look at this list, like, how do you feel about what's on there?
Yeah, they were in different form. Our attorney actually made me take down because I love to swear, and that was like, it was firmly in there. It was a huge commitment I had, and so I changed them a little so they were website appropriate. Yeah, man, I really felt like these are a reflection of the things that, like, the guiding principles that I use to build Blackout and to build myself. Like, it wasn't just Blackout. This was before Blackout, just to care for people, to care for what I'm doing, and to do it with like a tenacity. Like, I was never a soft personality. I was always kind of a pushy person, pushing the limits, pushing, whatever. Just, I was that guy. I was just always the guy, like, well, I don't know. Can we do it this other way? Like,
it's not just caring, it's caring hard.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Exactly. Right. And I think that, each one of those things, there's a spot within Blackout's journey and within my journey personally that is earmarked with one of those. And the one actually that came about recently that I really, really enjoy is share pain. And to me, that is such an underutilized thing within businesses.
What do you mean by that?
So, like, to me, we all carry pain in some way, shape, or form. And we've got so hyper obsessed about all this, like, politically correct. You can only, it's almost.
Don't swear.
I was close. I was close, man. But we get so focused with the office place forcefully being this rah thing. We spend so much time in this environment around these people, and there's stuff that just pisses you off daily. Like, it just happens. And then what do? We just crack it down, internalize it. It didn't happen. And you're forced to just, you just get this grit inside of you, which curbs productivity. It makes you disgruntled. It impacts your peers. Like, it's just a bad deal.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to encourage an environment, like, get that out. Yeah. Like, get that out with a coworker, get it out with a manager, go scream in the bathroom. It doesn't matter. Like, that pain, to have rage or whatever exists, it's okay to feel your feelings.
Mm-hmm.
They're real.
Mm-hmm.
Directing them and decisions you make and stories you create from it, those can get a little messed up.
Yeah.
But feeling your feelings is really important. And to feel pain or to feel hurt or to feel any of those things is like, I watched so many people, and I've done this myself to the point where, it almost put me in a terrible spot physically. You just internalize all these things, all these emotions, and you never get a chance to express them. You never get to express joy. But in the office place now, it's like, oh, no, just joy only for you. Ping pong and air hockey. That's it. Just joy. It's going to be Google. We're going to all have hoverboards and we're just going to float around and everything's going to be fine. That's not reality.
Yeah.
Reality is if you're working hard and we're in an intense environment where the stakes are super high, stuff's going to happen.
Right.
And it's going to piss you off and it's going to go wrong.
Right. And
how you act when it goes wrong, people are changed and forged. And I love those moments. So like, I really I've encouraged myself to step up in those moments and say, hey, this sucks. Now what?
Right.
Like,
and it's not just a business problem, right?
Oh,
I mean, it's like
sure.
people are getting bad medical reports. Somebody had a loved one pass away.
Yep.
I mean, there's pain that comes in a lot of different forms that people are bringing into their workspace as well.
And you have no idea, right? Like you would have no idea other than Bob just sucks all of a sudden.
Right. What's going on?
And I just kept pressing, and I started noticing people were laced with debt. It was burying them. Like it was burying people. And more money was not the answer. Like how
Something else
you
was going on.
Yeah, exactly. It's like these are decisions that you're making.
Yeah.
So like, let's talk about the reasons behind the decisions, and then let's talk about a result, and let's just walk the path between those two things. But I would go in on people at that depth, like at the beginning, before the suits and ties get involved. It's like, I'm like, hey, bring in your bank statements, man, right now. I'm not giving you a raise until you show me your bank statements. It's probably illegal. I'm probably going to get sued. But the point is impact. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like when I say I want to impact people and I want to forge leaders and do that, like that is the depth of impact that I feel like is necessary to generate people, because it requires the occupant to be truthful and forthright.
Yeah.
And there's a level of submission that happens in that process that is therapeutic. And that's me going through that process as well and being honest with, hey man, this sucks. Like I've had meetings at Blackout where I'm full tears, man, like not in a good spot. And, it's just reality. It just is, and the fact that I think workplaces hold back from some of that stuff is a huge disservice to employees as well as leadership. And then everyone wonders why, oh yeah, we're feeling this disconnection. It's because you're getting 32% of the people you're writing checks to.
And so having the authenticity, right, and sharing who you are with them. And then there are times where, as the leader of the organization, you need to vent, or in certain cases you need to vent elsewhere, right? It's maybe something you can't vent, you can't process. You're on blood pressure meds in your 20s, right? You're getting up at 2 a.m. because you're dealing with the stress and internalizing that. Where it's lonely in that role and the responsibility and the burden that's there. A lot of people want to point to the successes and the fruits or the cars or whatever it might be, but they're not seeing the pain and the hardship and everything else and what you're carrying. So how do you put yourself in a healthy environment in a scenario where you're sharing the pain with others, maybe outside of Blackout? Is that something that you've done or are doing or? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. I've got a couple groups of guys I run with that we're all on that same level. One of them's through Warrior Week that we had talked about. And that was a game changer for me. That was a time to acknowledge my feelings and drop a bunch of stories that I think just as men specifically, we tend to shoulder so much of this stuff. Like we need to bring home the buffalo, and there's this huge pressure and push for this thing, right? We have to bring home cash. And nobody talks about how it feels to do that or what that looks like to do that.
Right.
So it's a constant, it's a battle, man. It is not, and anyone that tells you that they're at that destination is not charging at something, in my opinion. Because you are going to break stuff in that journey. If you're running something and you're really pushing it, it is going to break. You are going to break, depending on where, obviously companies that are at mega scope, they get a little bit more insulated from that cycle, but but nobody talks about how do we bandage up the entrepreneur.
Right.
It's just like take, and then move on.
Right.
So that to me, that's that's the cup fill right there.
Right.
And really, spirituality is a huge one too, man. That was an empty spot for me. That was super empty. It was really disheartening. I felt super alone, man, super alone. And it got to the point where it was, I'll never forget. I pray that I'll never forget this. When we made we grossed our first $1 million. And I remember thinking, if I can make $1 million, I can literally do any. This is me, just hillbilly Garrett in a truck, $1,200, hopes and prayers. Like, if I make $1 million, if I gross $1 million, like the world is mine, like just think that's just what keeps circulating. I remember we hit this target in like July. It was my annual target. It was like our second or third year or something. And I'm like, we hit it in like July. And I remember pulling like a QuickBooks report or something. And I'm like, my heart just sank. Like it was the first time that I had been severely let down by money or my association with money. And it was so wild that like to feel that way over something that I had glorified. Yeah. It was the first time that I realized that my destinations are messed up. Like it just felt like, like just kind of rotten internally. Like you just feel like something's disconnected there. Yeah. So,
and, that's, you come back to certain aspects of scripture that point to that. Right. Yeah. But then they had that realization on this of going, that's not it. Right. I forget all the different celebrities that have been out there. I wish, the sayings of, I wish people were celebrity for a day because they'll realize that's not the answer. I wish they had money for a day because they'll realize that's not the answer. It's not the answer. It's a tool to be used in how you're achieving. But if that's the destination, you're never going to arrive. Yep. You're never going to get there.
You're screwed, man. You're not just never going to arrive. You're headed down. And this is from a person that's headed down that road. I mean, you could make $1 million or $5 million or 10 million or 15 million. It doesn't matter. If you're chasing dollars, like I'm so tired of that mindset that puts money in front of everything. It is the worst strategy ever. Money is crucial. It is crucial, but you said it perfectly. Money is a tool. That's it. Money is a tool. It's literally a tool. And the more emotion that gets wrapped up in it, when I started putting money in front of God, man, disaster. Terrible, hollow, no direction, no poise, no certainty, no nothing. It's just a rat race.
So we'll bridge a little bit to the family, right? Because Lindsay's, walking alongside you through all of this. Yeah. What is she saying, observing you going through this internally and personally? But it's never just you, right? Yeah. Because it spills over on the people that you're serving. It spills over on your employees and your team. It spills over in your house and your family, right? What's Lindsay saying to you during all this time?
I think first, what did I sign up for? Like, Lindsay, Lindsay's actually the reason that I formalized a jump into Blackout. So she had witnessed me just bleeding for other people and bleeding for other businesses and constantly tapping out my capacity or their capacity for me within a business. So I was the guy that, okay, cool. You want to sell this product and great, let me do it. And then I would blow out the product. Okay, I could land all these sales. And then the other person on the other side would say, well, no, I don't, it's not really me. We don't want to do that. So she was tired of watching me not fight for us and fight for somebody else. And which was unique because I had done that and I'd mostly worked for small businesses, like through tire distribution and all this stuff. Like when I moved out to the Midwest, it was the first corporate job I'd ever held. Okay. And it was the easiest job ever. It was crazy. I was done. I started at 6. I was done with my role at like 8. And I'm like looking for other stuff to do and trying not to get in trouble and doing my leader's job and their job and the regional job, like just whatever, just to stay busy. And I'm like, man, she saw that cycle and was like, this dude is going to implode or get fired because he's just stepping on toes. So she actually was like, hey, when are you going to fight for us? And I was like, well, I think I have an opportunity. So that was really what was that was the start point for Blackout, was her. So she had come from an interesting environment. Her mom was a teacher and her dad owned a moving company. So she had seen her dad go through this same cycle like of entrepreneurship where there's the yo-yos and the long nights and all that. And it was I don't want to say that she was built for it, but she was built for that. Like she had just like I was built for entrepreneurship via my parents.
Yeah.
She was built to be alongside entrepreneurship or be involved in entrepreneurship directly like that as a spouse from the get. She had just watched it her whole life, and not the glory of it, the terrible parts of it,
right?
You know,
right.
And
the good, bad, and the ugly.
Exactly. I mean, I think it's so easy to just over glorify good times.
Yeah.
And then, but the dark times are what make entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
It's not the good times. The good times are the tip of the iceberg. The dark times and how you act in those times. I've been with her. I mean, when I moved out here, I had probably $15 in the bank, and she just took a straight flyer on me, man. I mean, seriously, it was crazy. I mean, it was absolutely crazy. Like, she saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. No doubt. And I had put myself in a tough financial situation, and she was like, "Hey, let's get this sorted out. No big deal."
Yeah.
And she was the one that, like, she's got everything together, right? She's a nurse, bought her first house when she was 20, like super nerd alert with school, like just bang, 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 like master's, nurse practitioner, all this great, amazing stuff that is just not me. Like her route through school was just incredible. Like, I truly admire it. I know that it's not for me, but to have, they're relatively, like, we had similarities from a personality standpoint, but what I didn't realize was how built for the back end and the messed up stuff we were. Where, you know, that, because you don't really know until you go to the pit.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh man, you've been here before. Yeah, me too. All right, cool. Well, at least we have each other.
Yeah. And the partnership that is, right?
Yeah.
And the coming alongside, and the support that's there, and not it being a, what did you do, but what are we going to do about this, right? And having her there. So as you talk about impact, right, and legacy, where we started out, and you think about impact, it is impact as a couple. So as you think about that impact with the businesses, and we talked a lot about the businesses, you have a young family, right? The number 4 on the way too. Congratulations again. But when you think about, the young family and the kids in the future, you're hiring young people into the businesses. What is the impact you want back for the family? What do you and Lindsay get together and say, here's what we want our family now to stand for beyond you individually, or even you as a couple? Yeah,
I think first and foremost, I was so scared to bring God into my family. Like, it petrified me, even though I grew up in a religious environment, we were never really taught about God. Like, it was formalized through school. I went to Episcopalian school, but that's a huge priority for me, is to continue to be a student of that and to bring that to my family and to bring masculine spiritual certainty to my family. Like, I feel a call to do that at a level that I can't even find words for. And that piece alone is, I think, something that we've just gotten away from, like, societally. And it's ruining families. Like, it's ruining businesses, it's ruining relationships, it ruins marriages. It's crazy how men don't want to show up for their family. And it's a battle. It's not, I'm not at the finish line. I never will be. I'll always be fighting that, like, production. How much time am I spending producing and in the fight versus how much time am I spending at home, and what does that look like? What does the balance look like? Because it's constantly moving, a total moving target. So that's a huge piece of it, is to bring those things that we had written down, like core values, like that. Those are family core values too, right? Yeah. Tell the truth, like, be a good human, care about what you're doing, and I think all those things just lead to such a strong family interaction that's where alignment happens. That's where trust happens. And if we're a family that goes behind each other's backs and steals from each other and doesn't tell the truth and things like that, then that's a mess. It's a complete mess.
There's I've never been one for really liking that terminology of it being a work-life balance. Because that's something, right? Because it's a no matter what, you're letting somebody down, something's failing, something you're trading off, right? I mean, I think that's the nature of it. But how do you integrate those things together? Because you want to integrate, your family time. You want to integrate your recreation. You want to integrate your work. You want to integrate your relationships, the people you're serving, how that all comes together. It's how you integrate all of that is way more important than how you try to balance it. Because if you try to balance it, you just picture all the plates spinning, things are going to start falling and breaking. So the integration piece of it is the challenge to figure out how you do that and tie those things together.
And there's such a big difference between time and intention.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like if you're intentional about the connection that you're having with someone, like you and I have had amazing conversations that last 5 minutes, you know, and we could also be in each other's presence and be completely off topic, sedated, flipping through Instagram for an hour. You know, you can, you can have that. So I started realizing that is okay. You know, that 8 hours with my kids trying to pretend like I'm father of the year isn't necessarily what they need. They might need 14 minutes of me just there, phone away from me, present, and then pop in, pop out, and they do their thing. And then they have a question, we talk about it. It's wired around their attention span, you know, which is good because I'm probably the most flighty, person. But I started realizing the importance of that. Like the time that I'm spending with them, of course, there's a limit. I'm not saying, hey, this is an excuse to spend 3 minutes a night with your kids or whatever. But to me, what you're doing with the kids, like I'm continuing to learn that how present I am in that moment is so crucial. Yeah. So crucial. And it could be a book that impacts them for a week. It could be a breakfast that just sends them to a level of euphoria that we probably haven't felt in a long time. So and I think it's a tendency to overcomplicate joy. Like my kids just want to go outside and kick a ball against a tree, or throw a rock at a squirrel or whatever. Sorry for the animal lovers, but I think we can all get
no animals were harmed in the production.
Let's get the T's and C's out. But I think that's really important. That simple fun is still fun, right? Yeah. And I tend to make things so overly complex. You start bringing business attributes into my personal life, like, oh yeah, we got these systems of fun and we got to do all these things to sequence this fun. And we got to go to the Great Wolf Lodge and we got to do all this crazy stuff. And it's like, no, they don't want that. They want me. They want purely me. They want to look into my eyes. They want to, gaze at the stars. They want to do just such basic things. And the charge for me or the challenge is, am I willing to get out of my own way to give them that? Yeah. I mean, that's a huge deal.
It was, so Valentine's Day was a few weeks ago, and we ended up getting together. I think there was 7 or 8 couples that got together, and they were talking about their kids and being parents, and also about being grandparents. Turns out Melissa and I were the only ones that are grandparents, right, with the kids. And we're kind of like, we're getting cast as the old people in the room again. And so the aspect of going, the biggest impact you can have on your grandkids is doing what you're saying with your own kids. Because if you're trying to skip your kids, then they go, oh, I'll have time for that with the grandkids someday. It's like, well, no, you've missed it because you've got to build into your kids. Because and I don't know where somebody said it once, but the best gauge of how you are as a parent is watching your own kids raise their kids, raise your grandkids, right? And so you have to be doing all of these things now in order for your kids to be raising their kids in the way that you'd want them to be, which in my mind really comes back to this legacy piece. You can't write your legacy in the end. It's not the destination. It's not the number. It's not the document. It's not the impact side of it that you had mentioned right at the beginning. I'm saying, are you impacting those lives on a daily basis? Where are the opportunities to impact the lives around you versus heads down and, just walking through the office or walking past somebody as well, and how you're approaching it? Because, well, then the impact you're having on your own kids and what that means, and your grandkids and your great-grandkids someday, that becomes the legacy into itself and how you're building that. And then the world around you, right? So your family, your faith, and then the world around you. And you and Lindsay are processing some things too beyond the business, which is also really important in terms of the impact that you're having on those individuals, the life change that's taking place for them, but then even thinking more broadly beyond that too. And it's still in the works, right? It's still a work in development. But how does that conversation play out for the two of you of thinking about that impact even more broadly?
I'll tell you what, it is hard for me to think that far ahead. And it's been such a gift to have Lindsay, who's got a tremendous amount of foresight around those things and around a formalized impact like that. Because a lot of what I consider impact is a conversation like this, right? It's changing someone's day. It's how did I impact that person this day, this week? as a whole. You know, a lot of it happens through the business. It could happen with personal friends or whatever. But Lindsay's approach is much more strategic. And I think like, I'm super excited to get to that, because then you're starting to really pull purpose over profit. And to me, that's like that's a huge tipping point within a business where you're able to be profitable enough and abundant enough to just truly give beyond just your time, but be able to give actual resources to things. Like I really admire people, and I want to create that. I don't feel like we're at that level, but we do it with time right now, because that give back is super important. Like if people have genuine questions about how to be a person or how to be a human, or I'm facing this challenge, what should I do? I'm like, man, let's solve this. Like, let's get into this. But to be able to formalize like a foundation or something like that, like that has always called to her. I mean, she's a nurse, you know, she's a nurse practitioner. So she's got that thing where like, she's got care wired into her fabric. That's not just a job for her. That is a personality that happens to have a job title that plays in the market. Like nurses are just different. Like care providers like that they're just different. So her care for people it's awesome. It's unapologetic. And I've got so much to learn from the energy she exudes in that space. Yeah. It was super cool when we were even talking, you know, with her loosely about it and talking about like foundations and things like that. I mean, it's freaking awesome, man. Super, super cool.
Well, you mentioned, you know, purpose above profits. And yet you even talked about the business when the business was growing, and you ended up with a disconnect there in terms of it being off purpose, because your growth was outpacing, right? The profits were outpacing the purpose. So even there, it's not waiting to get to work on purpose, but you brought your purpose back into the business when you had to go through the hard restructuring that you did, and continuing to bring that forward. Because you think about we've talked about intellectual capital, development, education, learning that takes place, the human capital of your time applied in different ways and giving back of the time, especially as you're growing a business, right? There's a lot of financial resources that get retained in to continue to grow and grow in that healthy and appropriate way. And then you end up with a point too, where you're looking at it going, okay, now you've got this, you know, not extra money, right? Because there's always a place for it to go.
Yeah.
But you end up with the resources and the intentionality aligned to purpose. And so the purpose is in the business, retaining resources that are making a difference for the people, the lives, the employees, their families of what you're doing there. There's purpose behind that you're bringing into it. And there's opportunity for impact in different areas, like you mentioned, through a private operating foundation, right, of some sort, right, or even grant making operations, and what that means to be giving of the treasure, the financial capital behind that. But I still think it needs the time. I mean, good giving, in my mind, still requires the time and talent, right, and the human intellectual capital alongside of, well, where the funds are flowing in order to truly have that impact that you want. Because just writing checks to end charities, right, let alone starting your own, is not good if those aren't good stewards actually deploying that capital in a way that's fulfilling the purpose that you're seeing too.
And the time that people choose to do that is really unique. And I'm trying to push myself to do that at an earlier timeline within this journey, right? Because so much of that, it shows up toward the end of a career or a business trajectory or a exit event or any of that stuff. You just see, because the revenue just continues to climb, naturally people start to glom onto that more and more. They get more time, there's more money floating around. And then, but I mean, think of the impact to be had from your 30s to your 60s that maybe people have been condensing from 58 to 65 at an exit event or whatever. And I think that's an important thing that we need to find a better way to do that as business owners, as entrepreneurs, to just have the dialogue, to just understand, what does impact look like year one? What does it look like year 4? What does it look like year 10, 15, 25? Those are all differently resourced items to have impact, whether it's financial or time or any of that stuff. Like year one, to have an impact is going to be super grassroots. You work for me or we work together, and I'm somehow going to find a way to impact your family. I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know if it's just that I'm able to cut you a check reliably or whatever, but as that impact grows, like I think it's important to revisit that dialogue, because like the intention of impact is always there, but it gets lost in the mayhem of movement.
Right.
It's so crazy, man.
Right.
Like when you grow something at a crazy pace, it's not ill-intentioned. It just, there's so many moving parts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And depending on the complexities of a business, like it's super easy to just say, you know what, I'm going to do that next year.
Yeah.
I'm going to just do that next year. I'll do that next year. And next thing you know, you're 67 at an exit event and you're like, now I'll do it. Now I'll do the big foundation. I'll write all the checks that I could have written along the way. And they don't even need to be checks, right? They could be just showing up with your team at a place and doing that
and
stuff.
There's families we work with as business interests that are being gifted out. And not to start getting into the minutia of that, but you end up early. The sooner you can do that, the sooner you have clarity of purpose in that way, the better the actual legal structure gets set up. And I'm not talking about the legal structure of the business and setting that up, but the legal structure of what it means in terms of the family enterprise with assets growing inside your taxable estate, outside your taxable estate. Where does the charitable component come into play? If it's a high growth asset, well, should you also move that outside of your estate at this point in time? Well, what does that mean versus the philanthropic tools that come into play, right? That whole aspect of having that conversation sooner than later. Can it be done after the event? Can it be done later in life? Sure it can. Can it have the same impact if it was done earlier? No. There's aspects where you can take out income and estate tax by employing some of these strategies sooner than later. So having that clarity on purpose, because purpose should drive everything. Purpose should drive everything. What are you doing, right? What are you getting up in the morning to do? How are you and Lindsay or Melissa and I or anybody else coming together and saying, well, what is it about our family? What is that impact that we want to have, which does bring us back to that legacy aspect of things. Yes, we already knew this coming into this. We could continue this conversation on in a multitude of different ways. But as we start, getting ready to wrap it up, if you step back, kind of like you did earlier with the young person out there that's thinking education isn't my way, what are the parting thoughts, right? One or two aspects that you're like, here's really, if you were to sum up where you're at right now as a work in progress, as we all are, that you've learned and that you want to encourage the listeners about, what would that be?
I would say self-investigation is mandatory. Self-investigation, it supports this journey, like anything within entrepreneurship, to be self-aware, as self-aware as you can be, and to understand that you're not the highest power that exists on the planet. Like those two things together, to continue to ask for guidance, to continue to pour in spiritually, those are the things that tend to fill your cup in those dark moments. So I don't want to say that, hey, entrepreneurs are forged in the darkness, but a lot of what happens and the results of a lot of these businesses are a product of whatever depth they were willing to go. And were they able to get themselves out of that? And we see tragic cases where people aren't, but the self-investigation throughout that process is the thing that spurs the dialogue to give early. It spurs the dialogue to impact early. Like it keeps you centered. It keeps you centered on your purpose and your mission. So without self-investigation or without being around people that are going to challenge you within that, to say, hey man, time out. Like you said this, you're doing this. That's right. Messed up. Like get back here. So there's a level of accountability that it starts with you looking in the mirror. Yeah. And it goes from there. And then it goes to this interaction where you're challenging me. Oh, hey, what about this? Oh man, you know what? I didn't get that. So being able, like when I say stay humble, that is what that means. It means to just continue to self-investigate and tear yourself down so that you can understand the whys behind the decisions and the stories that you're creating in your life and do something positive about it, right? Make a change, make an adjustment, and do it frequently enough that it's not like, well, I've been on a heater for 15 years and then now I realize I got a bunch of unethical people working for me and we got to take it down. That's not my experience, just in general. Yeah. So I think that being able to be humble enough to understand that although it takes grit to build something, that there's larger powers than you or me within this, and to continue to investigate those and to continue to investigate your place in that hierarchy is so crucial, man. Like I think that is not a thing. I think that is the thing.
Amen to that, right? So I think in my closing, that just kind of struck me. So as we wrap here, I'm just going to close up and I'm going to read back through the values that you have, because so much of it does reflect, and that's the beauty of it, right? These are your personal values that you're instilling in the way that you want to operate in the world back within your business, but also with your family, not just Garrett, you and Lindsay together, and what this means. So 1 is care hard. 2 is solve problems. 3 is be accountable. 4 is share pain. 5 is get better. 6 is details matter. 7 is stay humble. And 8 is choose fun. And I just love ending on that.
You got to
right?
get choose fun in there.
Choose fun. Because it's a ride.
It's
right?
a choice,
It's a ride.
man. It's a choice. It's a choice.
Choose fun.
It really is.
Garrett, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me, man.
For listeners that want to continue the conversation, please send us an email at clearconversations@ccpwealth.com. Thank you and have a blessed day.